I've never been comfortable at office gatherings. They always feel staged, as if everyone is auditioning for a role they already handed themselves. You step inside and the air is thick with wine and drive, cologne and rivalry. People laugh too loudly, stand too rigid, and flatter with edges sharp enough to cut. But I went for her because she asked. The last time I refused, she told me I wasn't trying hard enough to belong in her world. So I slipped into the gray suit she favored, shined my shoes, and showed up 15 minutes late to look effortlessly casual. It was on a downtown rooftop, all glass and steel, the kind of place where conversations about IPOs and designer dogs carried the same weight. She was already there, draped in a navy dress, standing beside a man with slicked hair and a watch that probably cost more than my car. She didn't notice me walk in, or maybe she did and chose not to. I threaded through the crowd, nodding at strangers I'd forget by morning. When I reached her side, she smiled, brushed my cheek with a kiss and said, "You came. That should warm me." Didn't. It landed like a box ticked on a list she hadn't expected me to check. Then came the man. Dean, I think. Or colleague. He extended a hand with a grip designed to prove something. "So, you're the elusive husband," he said, irony dripping. "I was starting to think you were a myth." I smiled politely. "Just low profile." He smirked. One of those, the quiet, steady kind." His eyes slid to my watch, my shoes, mentally tallying and comparing. I knew the type. Boisterous beneath the polish, fluent in subtle insults. My wife laughed too loudly. "Dean's just teasing. He's our star negotiator." That told me enough. Dinner became a sequence of barbed jokes disguised as humor. Dean sat across from me. The table filled with her team, young and sharp, clearly enamored with her. They laughed when he joked about people who peak in high school, right after I'd mentioned coaching football in my teaching years. They chuckled when he asked if I'd ever done anything beyond domestic hobbies. I smiled, sipped my drink, and stayed quiet. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, what even she seemed to have forgotten, was that I had once been someone entirely different. Before teaching. Before this quieter life. Before I shed the man I used to be to support her ambition. She once loved retelling how we met. How I walked into the cafe where she worked part-time, hoodie on, paperback about artificial intelligence in hand. How she teased me for being a mystery nerd. And I disarmed her by quoting Camus. She said I intrigued her because I wasn't like the corporate men she usually met. She called me her rooted one. But roots, when buried, are too easy to overlook. Dean pressed on. His next play was a toast. "To partners," he said, lifting his glass. "The ones who keep the lights on, back the dream, and maybe don't understand the business, but try anyway." Polite laughs followed. Some genuine, some strained. My wife's eyes darted toward me, gauging my response. I lifted my glass too. "To partners," I said. "The ones who know when to listen and when not to." His smile faltered just a beat before the table's chatter moved on. Dessert arrived. A pistachio torte that looked engineered rather than baked. Dean leaned forward. "So, what do you actually do?" he asked, stressing actually like it might peel away a disguise. I met his gaze calmly. "These days I teach. But before that." I let the pause stretch. "I built things." "That's vague," he laughed. "What kind of things?" And just as I began to answer, my wife cut in. "He used to run a small tech consultancy," she said quickly, waving it off. "Local projects, nothing major." I turned to her. Our eyes locked for half a second. That was the moment. Not the digs, not the mockery. That was when everything shifted. She wasn't being protective or even modest. She was embarrassed. She hadn't told them who I truly was. She'd rewritten me to fit the story that suited her climb, and I'd let her, for years. Dean leaned back. "You should come work with us," he grinned. "We always need someone for—" "What did you call it?" "Small stuff." That's when I smiled, truly smiled. Not the tight, polite mask I'd worn all evening, but a calm, steady grin, the kind you wear when the tide is about to turn. Because before I became the supportive husband, I built and sold a company to a Fortune 100. I wrote code banks still use. I held patents, ghost-advised for venture firms, quietly co-founded startups that became household names. And then I walked away for her. To create a life where I wasn't sprinting toward the next acquisition, the next collapse. She'd said she wanted grounded, real. I didn't mind being small if small meant peace. But this was different. I glanced at Dean, then at the table. The smug grins, the clinking glasses, the arrogance. They had no idea who I was. Not yet. The car ride home was silent. She sat scrolling on her phone, the glow reflecting across her face. I drove, watching city lights smear across the windshield like oil on water. There was a time when these drives brimmed with laughter. Her hand on my knee, her head against the glass, telling me the night's stories like I hadn't seen them myself. Now just silence. Finally she spoke. "They liked you," she said, still staring at her screen. I said nothing. Dean was just being himself. He teases everyone. Don't take it personally. Kept my eyes on the road. I didn't. You seemed tense. I breathed out slowly. It's fine. It wasn't. But I wasn't ready to say that. Not yet. Later, after she went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, the hum of the fridge the only sound. I poured a whiskey neat and stared at the city skyline. I thought about all I'd traded away. The consulting firm I sold before 30. The partnerships I'd walked from. The university offers, the keynote invites. All exchanged for a quieter life, a shared dream. Her dream. I didn't regret it. Not really. I still believed in her, in some far-off way. But somewhere along the line she stopped believing in me. Or worse, started seeing me as less. A background figure. The teacher husband. The man behind the woman. I never craved the spotlight. But I did need respect. The next day, I did something I hadn't in years. I opened the old vault, an encrypted drive locked in a fireproof box behind our shelves. Inside was everything from the before me. Source code, frameworks, white papers under pseudonyms, emails from CEOs, contracts, a blueprint of the life she no longer mentioned. I spent the day sifting through it, sipping coffee, jotting notes. By sundown, a legal pad filled with sketches and calculations. Not a plan yet, just the outline of something. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was remembrance. I didn't tell her. Not because I wanted secrecy, but because I wanted to see what she would do next. Whether she'd ask how I felt about that night. Whether she'd apologize for letting Dean speak that way. Whether she'd notice the quiet shift in my eyes. She didn't. She was tied up with preparations for a corporate retreat. 3 days in Palm Springs with her team. Dean would be there. On the second night of her trip, I received a text. A photo of her and the team by the pool. She was smiling, sunglasses perched on her face, holding a mimosa. Dean's arm rested casually along the back of her lounge chair. Not touching, but close enough. I stared at that image for a long time. Not from jealousy, but because of what it symbolized. She knew exactly how it looked, and she sent it anyway. That night, I reopened my LinkedIn, refreshed my profile, and sent a couple of emails to old colleagues, people who owed me favors. By morning, 3 responses had arrived. Meetings offered, interest sparked. Like flipping a switch, my old network reawakened instantly. By the time she returned, I had a coffee lined up with a venture capital group and a lunch with a founder seeking a CTO. I didn't hide it. The calendar sat open on my desk. She noticed as she grabbed her charger. "You're meeting with VC firms?" she asked, surprise in her voice. "Yeah," I said casually. "Just catching up with some folks." She blinked. "I thought you weren't interested in that world anymore." I wasn't. Things change. A flicker crossed her eyes. Curiosity, uncertainty, maybe unease, but she didn't press. That told me everything I needed to know. The next week, I attended a mixer hosted by one of the VC firms. Another rooftop, same sleek drinks, designer attire. Only this time, I wasn't the quiet husband at the periphery. I was myself again. I shook hands, shared battle stories from startup trenches, spoke with clarity and authority. Eyes lit up when I mentioned the framework I'd built, still in use by a major payments processor. Invitations followed, to speak on panels, to advise a stealth mode fintech for equity. Just a few weeks of work. The gears turned quickly. When you've done it once, when you truly know your craft, it doesn't take long to remind the world, or yourself. She never asked how the event went. Never asked what I was building. She just smiled when I mentioned I'd be working late. And Dean. He'd be seeing me soon. Not as her husband, not the quiet plus one, but across a different table. One where the terms weren't flattering, one where I wouldn't be underestimated. The first time Dean saw me again. He was in a navy blazer, leaning across a boardroom table in a downtown office with panoramic views. Animated, he rattled off quarterly projections and brand strategies, tossing buzzwords like confetti. He didn't notice me at first. I was seated beside David Lynn, a senior partner at one of the VC firms invested in my advisory work. David appreciated people who spoke with purpose, not just for sound. He valued results, and I had a quiet, proven track record. Dean strode to cue his slides. Then his eyes met mine. Pause, half a second barely, but in that instant something shifted. He faltered, cleared his throat. Looks like we've got a full room today, he said, forcing a smile. I didn't return it. The meeting began. Pitch session. Dean's firm sought funding for a new AI-driven market research tool. Numbers polished, branding tight, delivery fast and confident. Charts and predictive models were presented as gospel. When he finished, the room went quiet. David turned to me. Thoughts? I leaned back, fingers steepled, watching Dean squirm subtly. The UI is decent, I said slowly. But the model underneath is outdated. They're still using a modified GPT-J base trained on biased consumer data. Predictive accuracy looks strong, but it collapses beyond a 2-month horizon. And they lack clear permissions on a portion of the training data. Dean stiffened. We've got legal clearance from the same team that cleared your last rollout, he said. I remained calm. That product had quietly been pulled 6 weeks after launch. The tension in the room thickened. David raised an eyebrow. That true? He asked. Dean stammered. It was a strategic withdrawal. I didn't press. My point had been made. Afterward, as the room dispersed for catered espresso, Dean followed me into the hallway. Voice low, he asked, "What are you doing here?" "I was invited," I said simply. He narrowed his eyes. "Some kind of power move." "No, but you made it personal first." He scoffed. "I was joking." "You weren't," I replied, stepping closer. "You looked me in the eye and decided I was small, forgettable. You humiliated me in front of my wife, in front of your team. You don't get to shrug that off now." He opened his mouth, closed it, jaw tight. "Does she know you're here? She doesn't even know who I am anymore." And that was the truth. Somewhere between dinner parties and the rehearsals of corporate ambition, she had stopped seeing me. Not the version presented to coworkers, but the real me, the man she once called her calm in the storm. I walked away before he could respond. That night I returned home late. She was on the couch, a glossy reality show flickering across the screen, a glass of wine in hand. She looked up as I set my bag down. "Long day." He nodded. "Productive." She smiled. "You look different lately. Confident." "I remembered who I am," I said, kissing her forehead before heading to the kitchen. The shift continued. Over the next month, my name surfaced again. On panels, in press releases tied to funding rounds, in quiet acknowledgments behind the scenes. Not loud, not flashy, but unmistakable to those paying attention. One evening she brought it up. "Dean said you crushed him in a meeting," she said over dinner. "He's been acting weird ever since." I sipped water. "He probably didn't expect to see me." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, tilting her head. "Would you have believed me?" Silence. That silence said everything. She looked down at her plate. "I never meant to make you feel less than." "You didn't have to mean it," I said. "You just had to laugh when they did." Her voice cracked. I didn't realize. She reached for my hand. I gently withdrew, not in anger but clarity. Where do we go from here? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Some things break quietly. Others break much later when the pieces no longer fit. I wasn't angry. Not sad. Just awake. Dean remained with the company. The project never received funding. The data violations I flagged were real. When the legal team reviewed the risks, they pulled the plug. I hadn't made the call. I only revealed the truth. And her. We still live under the same roof. Now. We share meals, space. But a new quiet exists. Not resentment. Not distance. Because the man they underestimated, mocked, and dismissed never left. He simply waited, for the moment they saw him again. Not at a party, not at a dinner table, but when it truly mattered.